My name is Eudora Whitcomb. I'm 65, widowed, and after a lifetime of careful planning, I thought I knew the rhythm of my own life. I've always prided myself on being steady, deliberate, the kind of woman who notices small details and remembers them years later. Yet nothing in my 65 years had prepared me for the sight that greeted me as my taxi pulled up the familiar streets of Charleston. The air smelled faintly of salt and azaleas, a spring breeze brushing past the oak-lined sidewalks. Houses I had passed 1,000 times looked the same, yet somehow different. Some freshly painted, some with new landscaping, subtle reminders that life had continued without me. My heart beat faster, a mixture of relief and anticipation swelling in my chest. In my mind, I pictured the welcome I'd longed for, the familiar creak of my front door, the warmth of a home I had built with my late husband, Anthony. When we pulled up in front of my own house, nostalgia and anxiety tangled inside me. I grabbed my cane and reached for the door, expecting at least a nod, a smile, something to tell me that my absence hadn't erased my place in this world. Instead, Olivia was there, blocking the threshold, her face unreadable. "It's no longer yours," she said flatly. "Don't come in." The words slammed into me like a physical blow. My hand froze on the doorknob, and for a heartbeat, the world blurred. My home, the place Anthony and I had painstakingly restored over 3 decades, was gone. My chest tightened, disbelief clawing at me. I stared at her, searching for some hint of jest, some softening in her eyes. But there was none. The air felt impossibly heavy. My mind raced, trying to understand, trying to make sense of a reality that felt impossible, yet was undeniably true. I lowered my head, gripping my cane so tightly that my knuckles whitened and took a tentative step back. The street felt both familiar and alien. I realized with a sinking certainty that nothing about this return would be easy. Olivia didn't move as I finally stepped inside the foyer, her posture stiff and controlled. On the marble table, a neat stack of papers lay waiting, stamped and signed. "These are the documents," she said, her tone sharp and clipped. "Everything is legal. You don't need to worry." I stared at the sheets, my hand trembling as I reached for the top one. The words blurred, at first a tangle of legal jargon and signatures that somehow belonged to me. My eyes caught my own name multiple times. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be. I sank into the nearest chair, the cane leaning against the table, and tried to retrace how this could have happened. Only a month ago, I had been in a hospital bed groaning through the pain of recovery from hip surgery. Olivia had offered to handle minor matters, the bills, the grocery deliveries, the scheduling of routine maintenance. I had trusted her completely. It seemed harmless then, and I had believed she would keep things simple. I had handed over small responsibilities without reading every note or signature she pressed into my hands. Now, the stack of papers before me revealed that that trust had been weaponized. Power of attorney, financial authorizations, transfers I had never authorized, commitments I had never agreed to. My own signature, or a version of it, had been used to move my home into someone else's hands. My pulse surged, a hot, angry rhythm that shook my chest. How could I have been so naive? I folded my hands over the documents, pressing them to my lap, feeling the weight of betrayal settle like a stone in my stomach. Anger and disbelief collided, sharp and relentless. My home, the sanctuary Anthony and I had built over decades, had been taken while I was vulnerable, unable to speak for myself. I thought of the late nights I had spent balancing accounts, reviewing statements, guarding our savings. All that care, all that effort undone. And yet, beneath the ache, beneath the betrayal, a flicker of resolve began to spark. If they thought I would stand idly by, they had misjudged me entirely. I would not let a set of papers erase a lifetime of work. Slowly, deliberately, I began to consider my options, to plan my first steps. Every detail, every loophole, every ally I could call upon would matter. This was not the end. It could not be. I spent the next morning hunched over my laptop, the papers still spread across the dining table. My eyes darted from line to line of bank statements, tracking every withdrawal, every transfer. Some were small, almost innocuous, but others were staggering, large sums moved into accounts I had never opened, held in names I didn't recognize. My stomach churned as I realized this wasn't a single lapse of judgment. It was systematic, carefully planned. Whoever had orchestrated this had known exactly where to start, exactly which doors to slip through while I was incapacitated. The house was eerily quiet around me, a stark contrast to the chaos these numbers represented. I glanced out the window at the familiar street, expecting comfort, only to notice subtle changes. For sale signs on neighbors' lawns I had walked past daily. The Wainwrights' charming yellow bungalow had been sold, the gates freshly painted in a color they wouldn't have chosen. The Harrisons had a moving truck outside, and I remembered their hesitant smiles months ago, unaware now that their fates might be part of the same pattern. My pulse quickened. This was no longer just about my home, it was about a creeping takeover. I couldn't ignore the pieces connecting Olivia's husband, Daniel, and his family. Over the past year, I had noticed Daniel asking casual questions about my accounts, probing for details about local property values. At the time, I brushed it off as idle curiosity. Now, in the cold clarity of betrayal, it all fit together. My house, the neighbors' homes. Every transaction an orchestrated plan for profit, executed under the guise of family visits, casual conversations, and my own trust. The thought that my daughter had been complicit, even partially, gnawed at me. And then there was Richard, my son. My own flesh and blood. He had always been cautious, ethical, and loyal, or so I thought. But now I wondered, did he know the breadth of the scheme? Had he been naive, trusting Daniel and Olivia more than he should have, or had he turned a blind eye for fear of rocking the boat? I closed my eyes, imagining him in that role, capable, intelligent, yet blind to the danger, or worse, afraid to confront it. My heart twisted at the thought that my own son might have contributed even unknowingly to this deception. I leaned back in my chair, exhaustion and outrage intertwining. Every instinct screamed that this was far more than a personal betrayal. The scale, the precision, the subtlety, it was calculated. Someone had planned this carefully over time while I lay in a hospital bed, vulnerable and trusting. And yet, beneath the fear and outrage, a sense of moral clarity began to surface. I would need to be methodical, deliberate, and patient. I couldn't allow anger to cloud strategy. If I acted recklessly, everything I still valued could be lost. This wasn't just about my house anymore. I reached for my phone and dialed the one number I could trust without hesitation. Gloria Evans answered on the second ring, her calm, precise voice cutting through the chaos in my mind. "Dora, it's been a while," she said warmly. But I didn't hear the casual tone. I was already blurting out the situation. The house, the documents, the withdrawals. She listened quietly, making occasional notes, her voice steady, even as mine trembled, with a mix of anger and disbelief. "I want to help Gloria," said finally. "You did nothing wrong, and we'll prove it. But you need to understand exactly what we're dealing with." We scheduled a meeting that afternoon at her downtown office, a place filled with bookshelves and carefully organized binders, the kind of environment that always made me feel methodical and capable, just by walking through the door. Once seated, Gloria outlined the legal options available. Power of attorney had been misused, yes, but there were limits to what Olivia could legally execute without explicit consent. Certain transactions could be challenged in court. The house transfer might be contestable if we could show coercion, deception, or misrepresentation. She reminded me to document every conversation, every discovery, every irregularity in my accounts. She emphasized patience. This was a chess match, not a sprint. We began gathering evidence immediately. I went through bank statements again, this time systematically noting dates, amounts, and recipients. Gloria suggested requesting property records, cross-referencing ownership changes, and photographing physical alterations in the house. Every email, every signed document, every small discrepancy could become leverage. I felt a spark of control ignite within me. Each piece of evidence brought clarity. Each recorded anomaly, a small victory over the feeling of helplessness that had engulfed me. By the time the meeting ended, I was exhausted but strangely exhilarated. Gloria gave me one final piece of advice: anticipate their moves, but never show your hand. I left her office, thinking not of betrayal, but of strategy. For the first time since returning, I could envision a path forward. My home, my life, my dignity. They were not gone. They were waiting for me to reclaim them step by careful step. As I walked back to my apartment, I rehearsed every scenario in my mind: entrances, confrontations, responses. The anger still simmered beneath the surface, but now it was channeled purposeful. This was no longer a story of helplessness. It was the beginning of action, deliberate and measured. Gloria and I had been sifting through property records and transaction histories for hours when the pattern emerged. Olivia's family wasn't acting randomly. They were systematically acquiring properties, buying from vulnerable homeowners, and flipping ownership through shell companies. Each transaction was calculated, precise, and far-reaching. My stomach churned as I realized the scope. My house wasn't just a personal target. It was the centerpiece of a predatory scheme, a foothold for controlling the surrounding neighborhood. I scrolled through the records, noting addresses 2, 3, 4 blocks away from my home. The Wainwrights, the Harrisons, even the elderly couple at the corner whose roses I had admired for decades. They were all being edged out, drawn into an intricate web designed to consolidate wealth and control. Fear gnawed at the edges of my resolve. This was no longer about personal betrayal. The community itself was at risk. And then there was Daniel, Olivia's husband. My initial suspicion had focused on him, but now the evidence suggested a deliberate orchestration on his part. Questions he'd asked casually, property values, neighbors' willingness to sell my own finances, suddenly carried a weight I hadn't recognized. My heart sank as I considered Richard, my son. Was he complicit or merely naive? He had always been cautious and morally grounded, but over the last year, he had deferred to Daniel in ways that now seemed suspiciously convenient. Perhaps he hadn't realized the magnitude, or perhaps fear had silenced him. The complexity of their familial and financial dynamics gnawed at me, making the betrayal cut deeper. I leaned back in my chair, the papers and digital records spread before me like a map of a small, manipulated city. Each new discovery sharpened my anger, yet clarified my path. I could feel the weight of strategy settling into my chest. If I reacted rashly, if I let emotion override calculation, everything: my house, my credibility, even the chance to stop this scheme could collapse. I made a decision. I would act deliberately, step by step, anticipating their moves while keeping mine hidden. Each withdrawal, each transfer, each falsified document would be cataloged, cross-referenced, and prepared as evidence. Every subtle alteration to my home, every missing item or unaccounted-for repair would be noted. The stakes had grown exponentially, but so had my determination. I was no longer just a wronged mother. I was a strategist with a clear objective. As the sun dipped below Charleston's skyline, casting long shadows over the streets, I once strolled freely. I felt the cold clarity of purpose settle over me. I would reclaim what was mine. Not just the house, but the integrity, the dignity, the peace I had earned over decades. This battle was bigger than revenge, it was justice. And I would see it through no matter how intricate the path. From my small rented apartment a few blocks away, I watched the rhythm of Olivia's household unfold, like a scene I had once been part of, now alien and calculated. Morning routines, casual errands, deliveries, all movements, predictable, rehearsed. Daniel left each day at the same time, Olivia meticulously arranging flowers in the sunroom, checking mail, glancing at her phone, with that precise combination of focus and calculation. I took notes discreetly, photographing documents she left carelessly on the counter, logging every visitor, every unexpected pause in her otherwise choreographed day. Each observation added pieces to a puzzle that was both infuriating and clarifying. One afternoon, as I approached the edge of the driveway to snap a quick photo of a package left by a courier, my pulse nearly stopped. Daniel appeared from behind a hedge, chatting casually on his phone. My heart raced, and I ducked behind a low wall, holding my breath, while he passed, oblivious to my presence. The adrenaline surged sharp and nauseating. Later, a neighbor called, unexpectedly asking if I needed help with groceries. I almost revealed more than I intended, my hand trembling over the receiver, before I forced myself to smile and decline. Each near discovery reminded me how thin the line was between success and exposure, sharpening my focus. Back in my apartment that evening, I rehearsed the confrontation in my mind with precision. Words, timing, entrances, and exits. Everything needed to be exact. I ran through scenarios, imagining Olivia's responses, Daniel's possible interventions, and even Richard's potential interference. I practiced staying calm under provocation, controlling my expressions and tone, turning fear and anger into tools rather than obstacles. Every detail had to be considered. Sitting quietly afterward, I let myself acknowledge the vulnerability that accompanied my age, my recent surgery, and the emotional strain of betrayal. Yet beneath that fragility, determination thrummed steadily. This wasn't just a matter of reclaiming property. It was about asserting the dignity I had earned over decades. I reminded myself that patience, observation, and strategic action would be my strongest allies. The sun dipped low over Charleston, painting the historic rooftops in amber light. I traced each street with my eyes, imagining the future moves, the timing of evidence collection, and the careful steps required to restore what was mine. The quiet of the evening belied the storm of planning and calculation that pulsed inside me. Each breath I took reinforced a single truth: I would not allow this betrayal to define the end of my story. I would move deliberately, cautiously, and without hesitation. I waited until late afternoon, when Olivia had gone to her weekly salon appointment and Daniel had left for a meeting across town. Every muscle in my body hummed with anticipation as I approached my front door, using the side gate I had always kept as a private entrance. My cane tapped lightly against the cobblestones, a rhythm I barely noticed. I slipped the key into the lock and eased the door open. The familiar scent of my home mingled with hints of lavender from the sachets I had left in the closets decades ago. Everything felt eerily quiet, yet charged with tension. Inside, I moved carefully to the living room, where stacks of packages and unopened mail hinted at the household's normal routine. I set down my briefcase and opened it, revealing folders of carefully documented evidence, screenshots of suspicious bank transfers, copies of property deeds under shell companies, photographs of Olivia and Daniel handling documents that had once been mine. My hands shook, not with fear, but with controlled fury. I spread the evidence on the table and began arranging it with deliberate precision. The front door clicked behind me, my prearranged signal. Within moments, 2 uniformed officers and Gloria entered their presence solid and commanding. I didn't flinch. Olivia and Daniel's parents, Raymond and Claudia, emerged from the kitchen, startled to see me calmly standing among my evidence flanked by the authorities. Their eyes widened as they took in the stacks of documents, photographs, and the controlled seriousness on my face. "This house legally belongs to me," I began, my voice steady and unwavering. "And these transfers, these manipulations are documented proof of fraud. Every account accessed without consent, every property moved, every falsified signature, I have it all." I paused to let the weight of the words sink in. Gloria added the finer details, explaining how each transaction had violated legal standards and how the authorities were prepared to act. The room's atmosphere shifted from arrogance to palpable panic. Raymond stammered. Claudia gasped, and Olivia's face drained of color. Daniel froze mid-step. Their calculated composure, so carefully maintained for months, crumbled in an instant. The officers began securing the documents and recording statements, while I remained calm, observing the fear and disbelief I had waited so long to witness. For the first time since discovering the betrayal, I allowed myself to breathe fully. The power of preparation, patience, and meticulous planning had shifted the balance. I had reclaimed not just the house, but the authority and dignity stripped from me. Every stolen transaction, every forged signature, every moment of deceit had been met with clarity and strategic response. As the officers escorted the family from the house for questioning, I stood in the sunlight streaming through the windows. My home, my sanctuary, was mine again. Not because I had forced a fight with reckless anger, but because I had combined wisdom, patience, and determination. The relief was immense, almost surreal, yet beneath it, I felt a steady pulse of empowerment and moral vindication. I ran a hand over the polished wooden banister, listening to the quiet settle around me. The battle had been won, but more than that, I had reclaimed a sense of self that no deception could take. The house was my home, and for the first time in weeks, the space felt whole. The house smelled of polished wood and faint lavender, a comforting reminder of decades spent here with Anthony. I moved carefully through each room, taking note of what had been disturbed and what remained untouched. My jewelry, recovered from a safe deposit box, glittered quietly on the dresser. Family photos, some slightly askew, were returned to their frames. I unpacked boxes of linens, books, and personal mementos, each item a small victory, reclaiming what was rightfully mine. The sun poured through the windows, and for the first time in weeks, the space felt like home again. I sat at the kitchen table reflecting on trust and betrayal. Olivia's actions had shattered my expectations, but they also clarified boundaries I had been too lenient to enforce. My son's naivety, his fear of confrontation, and the subtle manipulation by his in-laws had tested me deeply. I realized that protection of self and home required vigilance, even within family. Strength wasn't just about fighting. It was about recognizing limits, planning, and acting deliberately. Beyond my walls, I reconnected with neighbors and friends I hadn't seen in months. Simple conversations, shared cups of tea, and offers of help reminded me that community could be both a shield and a source of joy. The neighborhood I had once worried about losing was slowly restoring itself, and I found pride in the small ways people had supported one another during my absence. Sitting on the back porch, the breeze lifting my hair gently, I felt a steady sense of empowerment and calm. The house was mine. The memories and history it held were intact. More than that, I had navigated betrayal, protected my dignity, and emerged stronger. A quiet hope settled over me, not naive or fragile, but grounded in clarity, resilience, and the knowledge that I could face whatever came next with confidence. The future was mine to shape.